We now continue with Smurf.
Things in my life have been pretty crazy recently, X, and I thought I might share since I've heard stories from here. I don't really expect anyone here to believe me, and that's fine. This is intended to be mainly therapeutic to me. I want to tell at least someone what is happening to me. I lived near an old patch of woods in North America when I was about 12 years old. When I say old, I mean primordial old. Shit lives in there that you never knew existed. I lived in a little town at the end of a dead-end lane before people started moving in and making changes to the town. I had 3 friends that I always hung out with over vacations and during the summer. We didn't all go to the same school, but we lived in the same town. Taylor, Josh, Pepper, and me. The woods were kind of ours. Nobody went or goes into the woods. There are no roads that went through them, and it was just better to avoid them unless you were really young, stupid, or high. Sometimes, a neighboring farmer's animal would get lost in the woods, and no attempts would be made to find it. Rarely any animals were ever found. If they were, they usually died of shock shortly thereafter. I can detail the sorts of things that we found in the woods, but that might be for later. The shit we found was pretty awesome, but in the summer of 1998, something happened that I can't really remember. Pep, Taylor, Josh, and I went into the woods, and apparently were kidnapped. We spent nearly 48 hours in there, but I can hardly remember anything. Here is what I can remember. At around 5 o'clock in the evening in August, we all met at the end of the lane, where we usually did, before we headed off to play. Because it was before the time of reliable contact with parents, my mom gave me her watch, and told me to remember to be back in by 7. We were all a little bit nervous, because people were saying a prowler was living in the woods, and they had seen him around town. And we were pretty certain that we had seen him too, though I don't remember actually seeing him. I remember running into the woods behind Pep and Taylor. Josh was fastest, and he was already over the fence and into the woods. We must have gone to the fort that we found. It was probably the remnants of an old house, but it was pretty unrecognizable to us. I remember hearing some crashing in the woods, and Josh asking if we heard it too. I remember telling Pepper she should stay put, and we would go and check it out. After that, I don't remember anything. After 48 hours, and our parents and people in the town launching a search for us, they found me in a place they had already looked. I was backed up into a large oak tree, standing alone in a clearing in the woods. I wasn't wearing shoes, and there were long, bloody gashes on my back and legs. They never found Pep, Josh, or Taylor. A hunter found one of Pep's barrettes some years later, buried underneath pine needles. He said he'd only seen it because he'd been up in a stand, and he had seen a glint below him. Some college kids found an old cache of our stuff that we must have left in a kind of burrow. It really troubles me that I can't remember more of what happened, and the stuff that I do remember, the therapist told me are probably false memories. I want to share some of these with you, if anyone is interested. Alrighty, I remember the Willow Man. He was tall, thin, and had a laugh like thunder. I remember seeing him in the trees, moving so fast that we could hardly see him. The day we disappeared, we did not see him at all, but other days we would see him mostly in the summer. I always wondered why. Maybe because he was harder to spot in the foliage. You could always tell he was there though, because he moved differently from the rest of the trees. We tried telling our parents about him. Mine were alarmed at the thought of a strange person in the woods. Pep's parents, who were very Christian, thought he was either A, a devil, or B, someone trying to scare us. Josh didn't bother telling his folks. He liked to pretend that he was more adult than the rest of us, and Taylor only had a mom who was usually out working one of her 3 jobs. Some people believed about the Willow Man, though. Some people even knew he was there. If we saw him, we did not stick around though. He never seemed to do anything except stand, watching you, about 30 feet or so away, swaying like a tree. To be honest, that summer we were a little bit obsessed with the Willow Man. We always knew he was there, but I remember Josh making it his life's mission to find the Willow Man that summer. The rest of us regarded the Willow Man the way you would usually think about a monster in your closet. You were pretty sure he was there, but you didn't have any real proof, except that you were scared as hell. So the summer began with us looking for places the Willow Man would be. This turned out to be pretty stupid. We automatically assumed he would be in dangerous, hard to access, or creepy places. In the woods, there were frequently old, abandoned buildings. Another town used to be next to ours about 200 years ago, and had been since subsumed by the woods. What happened to people in the next town, and why did it not exist anymore? They probably all moved out into other surrounding towns, but we like to think that the Willow Man had gotten to them. You could still find old cobblestone paths peppered throughout the woods, and if you followed them, you could trace the outlines of the old towns. We decided that the town's graveyard, and what we decided was a cheese factory, were the most likely places for the Willow Man to be. I think we quickly decided that the graveyard was a wash. I remember going there one evening, and finding a few graves, and in the dozen or so that were there were empty. While unsettling and creepy, Taylor, Pep, and I did not take it to be obvious evidence of the Willow Man's movements, but Josh thought otherwise. He was sure it was the Willow Man's work. He had either dug their bodies back up, or these were graves where people were dead, but no one ever found their bodies. I remember spending a few weeks of sleepless nights, waking up and looking into the woods after that, to make sure that the Willow Man had not followed me home. The cheese factory was a little bit different. I can't remember what happened there very well either, but I remember running and falling out of the woods with Pep and Taylor. I remember we thought that we had lost Josh in the factory, but he showed up cranky and pissed that we had left him when we had stopped to hop across to the town's old cistern. I don't remember any of this happening, but I know whoever we had seen in the cheese factory had not been Josh. The old town was generally where we spent the first few weeks looking for the Willow Man. There honestly was not that much to explore, since it was all run down, and before the advent of electricity. There was also a sort of a watchtower made of wood somewhere in the center of the woods. While you might think that we were trespassing, this thing was as old as dirt, hewn from whole trees by probably axes, and held together by old, rusty metal nails. It was the most curious construction. Josh decided around the end of May that it was originally built by the old townsfolk to keep a lookout for the Willow Man, and decided in keeping of our forefathers' tradition, we should use it to do the same. We planned to have a sleepover in it, in fact. I remember lying straight-faced to my parents about sleeping over at Josh's. We all did, in fact, except for Josh. We all snuck into the woods at around 5 and climbed up the watchtower. It was close enough to the village that I could see the town fire hall, right at the edge of the woods. The watchtower was not that tall, maybe 15 feet or so, and it had a great ladder that we discovered could be pulled up through a lever system. We did not manage to spend the whole night. At around 8, we started hearing this aggravated breathing and crashing through the undergrowth, and then this long moaning. It could have just been someone who was high or drunk, but we spent another hour sweating out the noises before we got too scared and booked it out of the woods. It didn't seem like anything pursued us, but when we went back to the tower the next day, the crackers, fruit snacks, and soda that we had brought in had been torn through and strewn around the clearing. That part right there scared me more than anything else in the whole ordeal. I think it might be worth telling you that the woods don't belong to anyone. I think it's a state park now or something, or a preserve or something like that. In any case, no one can use it for foresting, except for growth management every once in like 5 years or something. As a side note, after the kidnapping, my family moved away from the town for about a decade. We didn't sell the house or anything. We lived with my mom's parents in the next town over for a while, before moving out to Seattle for a few years. When I was about 18, we moved back into our old home. I didn't and still don't remember what happened, so going back home did not feel that traumatic for me. I felt like Pep, Josh, and Taylor were still here. I still do feel that way, to a certain extent. I just don't know where they are or what happened to them. Your feeling of them still being there is probably due to you not being there to let it sink in that they are gone, and the sudden return of all the old feelings that the town brought on too. You're probably right. It still doesn't feel real. I keep expecting them to just show up. In any case, after the watchtower, we found something like a burrow farther into the woods. There were 3 rocks, 2 propped up and 1 on top, leading down to a hole in the ground. At first we were distracted, thinking it was an animal's den or something, but after shining flashlights, tossing in noisemakers, and finally crawling in, we discovered it was actually a deserted cave. There was a rank, rotten smell in there, more human than animal, It's weird that I remember it to this day, or maybe I only remember remembering. There were things around the burrow that made you almost think that a person lived there. There was a little hole where water dripped down from the ceiling and made a kind of water dish. In the corner, there were old magazines and the end of gnawed bones. We were puzzled as to what to think of it. We figured it was probably some hobos or college kids, but then Josh decided this was where the Willow Man took the people that he stole and kept them here before they disappeared forever. Taylor chipped in, figured he ate them, but we all knew that was not true. The Willow Man didn't eat people, that was just stupid. It took a few days to sufficiently stake out the burrow. In fact, it took about 2 weeks before we moved on from it, figuring it to be a bust. Nothing ever happened while we were there, so we figured it was safe enough to use for ourselves, and we decided to keep different Willow Men hunting odds and ends there. At one point, we ended up stashing a whole Coleman tent in there, but it ended up getting shredded to hell in the end of July, which was when we decided to stop using the burrow. Besides, we were pretty sure someone else was trying to use it too. When we would visit the burrow, sometimes our stuff would have been gone through or sometimes missing. Occasionally, there would be drag marks outside the opening of the cave, which creeped us out more than anything. A lot of the other shit is pretty surreal and probably did not happen. For example, I remember seeing the Willow Man outside of my house where the woods meets my lawn, clinging to the tree closest to my house and staring into my room. He would reach up and scrape the window to my room with his fingers and whisper, "Come play," and I would scream and no one would come for me. Another time, I remember playing in the treehouse in my yard next to the woods with Pep. We were playing a card game, I think Uno, when we heard this snuffling against the side of the treehouse, like a dog had gotten up there. We both froze, and it continued until it reached the entrance of the treehouse, when we heard something digging into the wood, like an animal scrambling to get in. We both started screaming in terror, and eventually my dad showed up, but he acted like nothing was wrong. He just popped his head up into the treehouse and asked if we wanted sandwiches or lunch. I think I mentioned before how keyed we were before we disappeared in August. It was kind of like that for the whole summer. Josh became increasingly more irritable and moody, and Taylor would space out and not hear things right away. Pep became kind of skittish and hung around me for comfort. At first, you might think this was just some normal prepubescent stuff, but the change was so sudden and radical that it stood out like a sore thumb. Pep's mom was even threatening to send her to a psychiatrist. We all started suffering from sleepless nights, and when we could sleep, we all had nightmares. I got to the point where I wasn't with my friends, that I would just lay listlessly around the house, and I remember hearing this one song around then. Just this one little snippet, and it keeps playing on repeat in my head, like a bit of carnival music. I almost think I hear it when we are out in the woods somewhere. Like I mentioned, I can't remember the day I disappeared entirely clearly, but I do remember snippets. One of the most disturbing things I remember is kneeling on my knees on a wide piece of stone, bedrock I think, with my hands up in front of me, holding something. I don't remember what this was. I also remember being gagged, I think, or something being forced into my mouth, but the first thing after I do remember after these little splintery memories is waking up in a hospital room. It took me ages to be convinced that Pep, Josh, and Taylor were missing. After a while, people started saying that they were dead, but I knew better. When we moved out, I still knew better, and I know better to this day. Which takes us to the present day. I am 25 years old, I have my own place in town, but I frequently crash with my parents because I am a giant pussy. As I type, I am in my old room in my parents' house, in fact, and I think the Willow Man is back. At some point, I will come back and tell you all the other weird little things we found in the woods when I was younger, but I want to get what's happening to me now off of my chest. It started a few months back, right before the winter started. I was taking the four-wheeler out just for something to do. I only have a part-time job, so I have some free time. And just as I was about to start it, when I saw something glinting just past the start of the woods. The woods, by now, have become something that is only vaguely frightening, like hearing something in an urban legend. But when I saw that glinting, like winking in the woods, I began to have a small panic attack. I could not identify why I was so scared, but I knew if I went and looked, I was going to find something that I did not want to. And yet, against my better judgment, I left the four-wheeler and went to the woods, and though it had only been about 100 feet from where I was standing, it seemed to take forever to get to where the woods began. It had been a pretty fresh, breezy day then, but the woods were still and calm, with almost no wind moving through. But then, the woods were always like that, and you can't judge what the weather is like when you were in them. They look so much different from when I played in them when I was a kid. There is lots more undergrowth now behind my property, and it just seemed quieter. No birds, no squirrels, nothing. Just the sound of wind. And where had the thing been that I'd seen flashing at me in the underbrush? I was torn between going in further to investigate and standing just where the woods began, because I was terrified. But before I could decide to do either, the trees had moved a bit in the wind, and the thing blazed up at me like a tiny beacon. It had startled me so much that I jumped back before I could see what it had been. I had stood frozen where I was before. I bent down to check it out. It was just uncovered under a little pile of dead foliage and mallow. It was an X-Men trading card that kept catching the sun and reflecting back at me, the holographic kind that were popular back in the 90s. This one had Wolverine on it, thrusting his claws at you. It had been Josh's. I tried rationalizing to myself because the last place that it had been was my treehouse, and then in the watchtower in the woods, but I figured it could have just basically migrated, like basically everything else in the woods does. But it had been so shiny and untouched by the elements, I knew this was not true. In the end, I could not pick it up. I felt like it was a trap, so I turned around and went back inside, leaving the four-wheeler out and getting a lecture from my dad later. When I checked back in the evening later that day to see if the card was still there, it had disappeared. I know I didn't imagine it, and it felt like a trap. It's in northern New York, but that is all I am going to say. I have been finding different things on the edge of the woods since then, but I have not gotten the balls to go in and check it out. When there was still no snow cover, I found an empty bottle of lemonade. The label was sun-bleached and faded, and something I remember from being a kid, a compass, something of Josh's that he had been exceedingly proud of, and we'd used to try to triangulate where the Willow Man would be, unsuccessfully, and a metal ball with tiny little dents in the surface, like an animal had been chewing on it. The last one, I have no idea what to make of it, but it seems familiar to me somehow. I have no idea how these things keep coming back to me, but it's been frightening me, to say the least. I have been trying to ignore the edge of the woods lately, because the snow cover is gone again, but I am afraid there is something there, waiting for me. I might take pictures of the woods when I head out to work, because I have to go shortly, so don't be distressed, guys. I will probably be gone until 6 or later my time, but I will come back and tell you more then. Back again, everyone. Sorry I came back and left so suddenly last night. Some weird shit happened to me. I was headed outside my door for work, and I had my phone ready and aimed at the woods to take some pictures, when I saw something flash past the viewfinder really quickly. So my heart was in my mouth. It had appeared to be bipedal and human height or taller and woods-colored, brown, but I told myself it was a deer. So I turned and walked down my driveway and started down the street. Happily, the street leads me away from the woods, so when I walked through town to get to my job, I managed to shake off a good portion of my fear. When I finally got to the library and was rounding the side of the building to use the back door, I stopped. The library is attached to the fire hall, which, if you recall, is pressed flush to the woods. I remember looking into the woods and seeing something, and the next thing I remember is kneeling on my knees, facing my own backyard at 5 o'clock in the evening. Once again, my feet were bare, and my wrists had pieces of twine tied around them. I did not have my phone, my personal effects, nothing. So I just kind of wandered into the house, which was warm but empty. I sat down at the kitchen table for I don't know how long before I started to crave some kind of human interaction and came on here, just to know I was not the only person in the universe. Then I went to bed. My mom woke me up about 10 o'clock-ish, asking me if I was okay, and that the library had been calling, asking where I was because I did not show up for work. I might have alarmed her a little bit, because we ended up going to the hospital again. I haven't been feeling really well since then. Everything hurts, and somehow, I've got all of these bruises on me. I will. Keep your shirt on. Here is how where I live works. The township I live in incorporates about 3 or 4 villages altogether, so although I lived in a town with around 1,000 people, I actually live in a tiny little hamlet with a cluster of houses. That's just how northern New York works, folks. Guys, sorry I left and did not return until now. I keep getting fucked with lately. I left work yesterday and got waylaid by Josh's mom. I spent the entire day with her yesterday, and she does not have a computer. She was freaking out for some reason, about wondering where Josh was, and if I had seen him lately. It's been a long while, and she never started showing signs of crazy. I was hoping this was just some sort of minor break, because of stress. To make her feel better, I spent the day and part of the night with her too. About 3 in the morning, I woke up. I was sleeping in the living room to hear taps on the patio door. Josh's family have this giant German Shepherd, and it's smart enough to claw at the door when it can see someone and wants in. So, half awake, I went to the door, only to find nothing on the other side of the glass. I kind of stood there stupidly for a while, staring into their backyard, before I saw something glinting in the yard. And then I realized something was staring back at me, or thought there was. There were these 2 little red lights, winking on and off in the mid-horizon. I tried figuring out if they were possibly cell towers, but then they moved off to their side yard, and I tried convincing myself it was some sort of animal. I huddled back onto the couch. The dog had jumped up, so it had been inside the whole time, and tried getting back to sleep. I did not mention what I saw to Josh's mom. The next morning, when I left, I saw there was a cow tooth sitting on the porch railing. It had been another one of Josh's keepsakes, something he had picked up on a trip to a farm in school. So I had woken up at about 5 or 5:30 this morning and made my way home. I did not bother with the cow tooth. It was still dark, so it was damned unnerving walking back to my house, but I made my way back untouched, made my way quietly into the house, and threw my ass into bed to try and get a little bit more sleep. And then, not too long ago, I was woken up by this awful shrieking sound coming from somewhere behind my house. I woke up, sprinted to my parents' room where the best view of the backyard is. My parents were already at work, and stared into the darkness again. I didn't know whether to pass it off as animals, because I did hear something brush against the house, and then some low, gnawing growling, but then nothing. It's just started getting a little bit lighter, so I think I may check outside and see if there is any carnage. To answer some things that were brought up, yeah, there was something up with Josh. He was kind of the leader of the merry band, and he was one of those kids that would grow up into one of those guys that naturally take charge of things. Also, yes, I am trying to protect my safety as well as yours. I've given you all of the hints I feel comfortable giving you, but I will stress again, I live in upstate NY, on the lake. It's about a 5-minute walk from my house. I'm sorry if my story has holes in it, though I really appreciate everyone coming to read and enjoy it. I didn't come here to make you believe it. I can only tell you what's been going on in my life and what's happened. I'm not going to remember everything clearly, partly because I'm human, and partly because my brain has been fucked with. Sorry guys, you were correct in thinking I had work. My family owns a farm that I work on when I'm not in regular work that pays me. In any case, I forgot entirely to share what else has been happening to me, aside from my random blackouts and my visit to Josh's mother's house. Recently, I will hear this one strain of music. I think I may have mentioned this before. It's like a little bit of carnival music, and then a little melody of bells. Our town has 2 churches, and one of them is still in use, and plays melodies every half hour. I recognize what that sounds like, but I will only hear these different songs when I'm closer to the woods. In retrospect, I seem to remember these from when I was a child too. It's an unsettling sensation, as if something is trying to lure me into the woods. I had a scare around last April, I forgot to mention as well. Remember how I told you I had been found barefoot? I discovered one of my old shoes, tied by one of the laces and dangling from a lower branch, as though someone had put it there for someone to claim. I recognized it though. I had been wearing Converses that I had been extremely proud of, with a star emblazoned on the heel. I had been heading out from my parents' house to go back to my place when I had seen it and had approached it to get a better look. The shoe was dangling about eye level to me, and everything about it just screamed the word trap at me. I could feel it deep inside my bones. I stood about 10 feet away from it, just examining it. It was battered and damaged from the elements, but I could still make out where the blood had soaked into them. That was when I heard this enormous crashing slightly farther off into the woods, in a rather leisurely pace. Could it have been deer? Certainly, but I noped the fuck out of there anyway. My mind might have been playing tricks on me, but I swear that I could hear a booming coming back at me from the woods. Sorry guys, I've been kind of busy today to try to keep my mind off of it. I was working on my family's farm when I heard what sounded like Josh calling me in the woods. I didn't go, but I just kept staring, and there was that thing again. Next time, I will take a tape recorder or a video camera so I can show you all. I have to get back to work for now, but I will update later. And the OP never updated again. He never came back to the thread and finished his story, so we have no idea as to his fate. Hey, hope you've enjoyed the story so far. If you want to hear more, make sure to subscribe, like the video, and leave a comment because it lets YouTube know you like the content and helps more people to see these videos. My next big goal for the channel is 100,000 subscribers, and as a celebration, I will be doing a Q&A video once we hit that goal. Thank you, and back to the stories. Be me. I was around 9 years old when this happened to me. I live in bumfuck nowhere, Pennsylvania. There is this massive blizzard in the first winter up here. The blizzard hits. We did not have heaters, so my stepmom makes my siblings and I sleep in the same bed for warmth. After a brief skirmish, I get the short end of the stick and have to sleep on the outside of the bed. It's around 2 a.m., and I wake up hearing creaking. I open up my eyes and hear a creaking coming from the basement steps, and then to the normal staircase, and then in the hallway. I squint my eyes to avoid letting this thing know I'm awake. By that point, my grandpa had let me watch 10 horror movies behind my parents' back. I knew how that shit worked. I can barely make out whatever this thing was. It looked like a woman, but with a really torn and disheveled dress. Its breathing is all raspy and sore, but its eyes looked like 2 silver dots. The thing is just staring at us in bed, and then creaks back downstairs to the basement. The next day I asked my brother, "Did stepmom get up and do something last night?" He says nah, she was there. Her boobs were pressing against my back. I couldn't sleep properly. Freakout.jpg. The next night, it comes back. Instead of watching us from the hallway, it walks up and starts to put its hands on my forehead. Ice fucking cold. I am trying my best to not start screaming my head off, but it just stayed like that for an hour. The thing finally goes back into the basement. My dad comes home from work the next day with a bunch of heaters. The thing never came back that blizzard. I got my own room that year and closed my door every single night. The next few blizzards in that house, I heard the creaking outside of my door again. Okay, I have a story from when I was 3 years old. This is one of my earliest memories. We were living in a house that my parents always say was haunted, but I was too young to remember most of the things that they say happened there. But I do remember one weird thing that happened to me, and sorry that I'm horrible at writing stories. So, I was sitting at the kitchen table eating lunch, while my dad was on the other side of the kitchen doing dishes or something. I was eating macaroni and cheese in the shape of Looney Tunes characters. I was waiting for my grandma to come and pick me up, to babysit me, while my dad went to his second shift job. None of these things are relevant to the story, but I just want to say that this is how clearly I can remember that day. From where I was sitting, I could see the front door, which had a screen in it so you could see outside. While I was eating, I noticed that there was this weird bird thing sitting at the door, staring at me. I'm not really sure how to describe it, and it didn't really look like a bird, but it was this thing that had feathers and a beak, was dark red and grey and about 4 feet tall, and it was just sitting there, staring at me with a look of anger. Like, I could tell just by its eyes that it wanted to hurt me. I can remember that look as clearly today as if it happened yesterday. I don't remember whether it eventually just left, or if I looked away, and it was gone. But eventually, it was not there anymore, and I continued eating, and never saw it again. Maybe it was just my little kid mind imagining things, I don't know. But I don't think I will ever be able to forget that image of those eyes staring at me.